Welcome to the Lazy CEO Podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser. I am your host and the founder of the CEO Project. We have a guest today, and, Mitch is a luminary in the area of visionary thinking, digital marketing, and actually professional traveling, which we're going to talk a little bit about. He is I walk around telling people with 2 million miles, I'm a professional traveler. I cannot lace the shoelaces of Mitch Joel when it comes to travel. So we're going to have some fun talking about that as well. But welcome, Mitch. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. I don't even have a 1.5 million. So I think you're actually ahead of me, Jim. So good for you.
I've read your stuff, man. You maybe you think more about it than I do. I don't know, but
I do. I might. Yeah, I do.
So Mitch, just why don't you give us a little bit about what you're doing now? Because if you look through your resume, you are a bit of a renaissance man. You got music, you got podcasts, you've got marketing, you got all kinds of stuff you do. So kind of what are you working on now?
So right now I have a new startup with my business partner, Aubrey Rosenheck. Aubrey and I were two of the 4 business partners that built a digital agency in the early 2000s that we sold about 10 years ago to WPP. We left about 5. And then Aubrey and I snuck off to this little space that we have here, which is, we live about 5 minutes apart. And so we figured, why not have an office 5 minutes apart from where we both live and have our families? And we came here because when I left the agency, they were gracious enough to allow me to leave with 6pixels.com, which is my blog and podcast that have been running consistently since the early 2000s, my speaking contracts, my book publishing deals. And that was the idea, is I would speak and publish and create content and do all those good things that we do a lot of investing. And then about under a year ago, we came up with this idea called Thinkers One, which you can find at thinkersone.com. And it's a place where companies can buy bite-sized and personalized thought leadership from some of the best thinkers in the world. So essentially what it means is, instead of waiting for that big annual convention or customer summit, any business can now hop onto Thinkers One and very easily either get a thought leader to pop in live to one of their regular meetings or a lunch and learn or something special for a client, or they can order a video experience, which is they choose the actual topic that they want. They fill out a personalization form, the thought leader gets it, and they record a video that they can run when they want in whatever meeting at whatever time. Nice. And so we've been doing that, and it's been a lot of fun, and I'm still out on the road speaking. I have 6 Pixels of Separation, my podcast that I do every week. And I also have a monthly podcast called Groove, the No Treble podcast, where I interview bass players. And that's been happening for almost a decade now as well. So I'm busy. I'm having fun. I'm really enjoying life being a CEO of one, I guess.
Yeah, right. That's funny. Well, like I said, a renaissance man. That's quite a diverse portfolio. So on this, the sort of bite-sized content from speakers, are the speaking agencies ready to take a hit out on you? Because it feels like you're disrupting their model quite a bit there.
Oh, not at all. In fact, we call them thinkers because a lot of them aren't even speakers. Some of them are academics, journalists, newsletter creators, YouTubers, just people who create video content. It really is a mid-tier video content thing than a speaking thing. I mean, if someone's booking a hotel or a convention center, there's a stage and they need someone physically there. I think that the Think Ideas, which are the recorded videos, can make great interstitials and great introductions, or a great way to maybe have me the following year after I've already been on the physical stage. But really the value proposition of this actually, I think, complements that. One is it makes thought leadership accessible to companies who could never afford to even think of having a keynote speaker. It really is more for this new world of work where we're getting our people together every week, every month, everybody, and we need to add more value than just be talking heads. And there are issues and challenges that we're facing. We're trying to figure out, how do we create better employee experiences? And I really feel like there's this sweet spot of value for these thought leaders who typically don't do this type of work in terms of everyday meetings to show up, be present. And the way it works is that it's short. So this is, you know, under 15 minutes ish. So it's not even traipsing into keynote territory in terms of time. And
Mhm.
because of that, it's a different pricing mechanism too, because you can't just fractionalize a keynote
Right.
fee for a sales meeting. It just doesn't make sense. So I see this more from an L&D HR perspective, a promotional perspective, sales leader, a marketing leader, management team that just wants to engage their team members.
Nice. That's awesome. You touched on a topic we've spent a lot of time with our clients on, which is the whole return to office dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, the research says that management sort of 80% rate wants everybody to come back for collaboration and coordination, coaching, all the C words. Um, and then on the other side, 80% of people don't want to come back. They rather work in their pajama bottoms. How are you seeing the people you deal with on that? You're sort of, a visionary, and sort of where does the state of work go to? What does this need to look like for it to be successful for both parties? Because they seem to have very opposed interests here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the bigger question is what is work? And when I deconstruct this, and I've been asking these questions religiously, not just on my podcast, but to myself and writing
Mhm.
about it and asking people, and even with Thinkers One, figuring out its market fit, because I don't even think it has market fit yet. It's so new. To me, the real question is that idea of what's the definition and context of work?
Right.
And I feel that once you have alignment on how do we define work and what is the context in which that happens, you have no opposition. You
Sure.
have complete alignment. You have teams working with that as the lighthouse. We know what work is, we have the context for it in this environment, and we move forward. And I think that challenging part is a discussion about culture. And
Yep.
what I think leaders are really struggling with is their definition of culture and their context of it. They're realizing is really different than that employee experience. And this
Hmm.
ties back actually into the actual existence of why we created Thinkers One. And by the way, this isn't original thinking from Mitch Joel. This is the work of many other great and smart people. If you look at even Tiffany Bova's latest book, I think it explains it probably more cogently than I ever could. But this idea that, during the pandemic, everybody was about this one click idea for their customers. Like, how do we really make it as simple and as easy as possible?
Hmm.
And maybe sacrificed on the back end the fact that all of these teams and departments were separated and siloed and 15 different softwares that didn't speak to one another. So it looked really great for the customer, but was really challenging for the employee. And that's that shift from this customer experience to this employee experience that I think is so paramount to defining how you answer that question.
Hmm.
Because the truth is, I would even argue that when we talk about return to office, I wonder if people are looking at it as a return to work or return to office. Like, what is their even perception of it? Is it
Hmm.
about the fact that people are coming back to the office because they're not working, or you just want, like, what are the parameters or reasons why we're doing this? And by the way, we were talking about this long before COVID and remote. If you start thinking about the campuses that the big tech companies were building out, like, why were they doing that? Right? They believed if they create a place that people don't want to leave, they won't leave. They'll do
Right.
their best work and they can have dry cleaning and dentist services and all that. Like, we were talking about this, but because the paradigm shifted, it's like we forgot. We all have COVID brain a little bit in this thinking. So I don't know that there's a direct answer of like, what does remote, what does hybrid, what does in person look like? I can just tell you, as someone who ran a digital marketing agency where we had at the end upwards of 15 offices in tons of countries, that we were constantly having people come and go, and freelancers and people on projects who are project based and then full-time employees. And we managed to build a culture and a great working experience and got people really excited.
Hmm.
So what changed? The fact that more people are doing this. I think the real challenge to it is that people were forced to go home and work from home. We were all forced, but we weren't trained and we
Yeah.
weren't optimized how to work that way. So the habits that we developed may not even be the best remote work habits imaginable. They could actually be the worst. We won't even know.
Right.
And so now we're saying, well, you got to come back. And people are saying, well, why do I have to come back? Well, other people are coming back. Okay, but why do I like it becomes this weird conversation where no one's zooming back and saying, do you have the best tools to do your best work? And your best work has a complete equation value to what I consider to be best for my company, my culture, and my vision. And there is this huge disconnect between that, because I would make the argument that you completing your tasks effectively in your job is a fraction of why someone hires you to be an employee at their work.
Right, right. You know, I wrote an article about the being thoughtful about work, location as a tool, as an element of work. So the idea here is that there are certain kinds of work that are better done with people together in a location, brainstorming or certain kinds of collaboration or coaching. And there's other kinds of work where you really don't need to be together, and that's okay. And this idea of return to work is not thoughtful in that way. It's sort of a blanket, come to work, come back to the office. Well, what if the answer was, look, there are certain kinds of work that we agree we should be together to do because it's just better, right? Strategic planning and a number of other, and anything else, you can be where you want to be. But for those things, we're going to be together. I think that's a more thoughtful answer. I haven't really seen anybody put that out there. They're thinking of one of the tools of doing work is location. And so how do we think about that, right?
I mean, I could poke holes in that. I could make arguments that would say, right, well, you could make arguments that say for some, their role in strategic planning is a lot of internalized work, and actually maybe they might be better optimized to do it remotely. We might make an argument that somebody has certain dispositions, whether it's physical or psychological, that makes them more effective when they're actually not in a room, because that's adding too much stressors on them, whether again it's physical or psychological. And this is what I mean by the context part, right? So you define the work, but then what's the context of that individual? I love telling this story because it seems so quaint now, but it was so informed at the time that it was they tried to blow this out across the whole network. So when I started my agency, our agency with my 3 other business partners, we were based here in Montreal, where I live. We opened up a second office in Toronto, which, for those who don't know, it's only an hour flight and a 6-hour drive. But in Canada, a large part of the GDP happens in one city. That would be Toronto. So it was really important to physically be there, which, again, if I go back to pre-times, I would get on a plane, land at the airport, at the island airport, which was about a 10-minute walk from the office. I'd be in the office before most of the employees were there, and yet we needed the physical space, even though I could fly in and out and be home and know I would have dinner with a client at 8 at night and be in bed in Montreal at 11 p.m. because the planes are flying every hour, like totally plausible. Had to open the office. So what we did to build culture, and again, erase everything that happened with COVID and the pandemic and work from home, is we had large walls, and both of them had live video feeds of the other office. And the philosophy we had is one office with a very long hallway. And there would be times where I would walk out of the office and wave to everybody in Toronto, get on a plane, and then wave to everybody in Montreal, like 2 or 3 hours later. And when we got acquired by WPP and subsequently changed our name to Mirman and became a much larger global agency, they wanted to use that as one of the anchors for how they would unify now, not just offices in multiple cities, but different cultures. Now we're talking international, different time zones. And again, it feels really quaint now, this idea that, again, at the time, everybody had Skype. It wasn't Zoom back then, everywhere. So you could be in the conference boardroom in Montreal, having a meeting with other people who are on Skype in the Montreal office just because they were doing other things. Very common. So this is what I mean by the context. So I wouldn't erase this idea of location. I think it's an interesting thought that has to be extrapolated and figured out for your own company. But I could also make the argument that it's very fluid. This is a very fluid idea. So I go back to this idea of, wherever you work, are you your best you? And that means also how you contribute culturally to the environment you're a part of, unless you're project-based and you're just a mercenary and you're here for 10 weeks, get the work done. That to me is the much bigger question, because I would argue that, Dan Pink always giggles and I love the word too. We talked about it on my podcast and we laughed a lot together. The idea of mouse jigglers was like one of my favorite words. We have this technology where it's just jiggling your mouse, so
Yeah.
it looks like you're active on Slack or Teams or
My
whatever.
Gen Z children told me all about this, right?
So you're in this headspace now of thinking like, wow, hold on a second. Culturally, I have people who ethically believe that this is what's needed to perform. So am I looking at you and saying you're not a great employee? I didn't give you the right training tools or cultural implications for you to feel connected here. And at the same time, I have to look at you and go, are these the type of employees I can endure?
Right. Interesting. So let's go over to digital media for a little bit. Okay, social media, digital media, which you have obviously deep expertise in. We've had Gary Vee talk to us before and some other people, but where do you see that evolving for corporations as a tool? Where do you see social media evolving to? Because we've kind of got the whole digital marketing, the quantitative elements, which I love as an engineer, but it feels like it's moving in a direction, and I'm not quite certain where it is. Yeah, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's moving in any direction that the marketing communications general landscape wasn't already in, but maybe just lacked the tools to really go after the reach and the content and the context of it as well.
Right.
And what I mean by that is if I said to any business owner, what if I were to give you like a percentage of how much your marketing should be brand storytelling versus direct response, what do you think that should be? Any
100% direct response. Most CEOs.
I think most businesses would say no. I think most businesses would say 50-50. Like you got to
Really?
go 50% brand storytelling, 50% direct response. I think where you're right, Jim, is that they're probably demonstrating more of 100% direct response. It's very addictive.
Yeah.
You put up a targeted message that's catered to somebody who's actively looking. I think intent has shifted a lot in the past couple of years because of the sophistication of how people search. So you might even think a core term to your industry is very relevant to your business and your search result. But in fact, the intent may not be there anymore because of the way in which we've gotten more sophisticated in how we search. So putting that aside and just thinking, well, how do you create the balance better to get you to a place where it is 50-50? Because I think we would agree that if you're constantly in the state of direct response, which is ad triggers action, you're not necessarily building a brand, which would lead you to a very bad place of commodification. Some businesses can do this really effectively, but most can't. And this creates a lot of panic in my thinking, because ultimately what you're doing is you're racing against how many people you can convert off of these clicks that have diminishing returns. It's really hard to keep adding new search terms and finding new customers. And that's a challenge. So you need to be telling a better brand story. And I do dance in and out of the idea of, by building a better brand story and doing direct response in a powerful way, where you're capturing them and then bringing them in. There is, people would use the word community. I think community is a strong word for a brand, and I think it might only be relegated to some brands that actually have people who would naturally on their own get together with one another, with the only true connection point being their passion and love for a brand. You see this in sports, you see this in other arenas. I just think that it's a bit of a stretch for most brands, but I do think getting people to be valuable, providing them with content, providing them with tools that make them feel more connected to you as a way to not have price be the only reason they're with you is still really imperative. So as much as the dynamics of it change, it gets exciting when you look at things like generative AI tools and you start thinking about things like Web3 and you start thinking about things like virtual worlds. It's all very exciting. I tend to calm myself on the excitement of the tools and technologies and platforms and look at them more and say, what are the actual consumer behavior? Like, are they actually buying and what does that look like? So I can give you a really quick example. You could look at something like Netflix and go, oh, well, the streaming services, subscription models, and look at what Disney just said the other day about how hard this is to do. And look at Netflix as, not letting people share, and now people are leaving, and, Twitter or X, now they want to charge. I think that there's a thought around this idea that we have a consumer behavior that we've habituated consumers to pay a monthly fee for access to a library over buying one thing. So you could look at that and say, well, how does that play into this? Well, it does, because you could look at how your data is siloed or stuck. It could be in the way a sales rep has to prepare a PDF to send to the client. What if you made that self-serve? What if you gave the customer access to the library? Would that be a differentiator from your competitor? Would that be a marketing engine that would keep people, customers closer to you? Would that be something they would pay for as a premium? And so suddenly you start looking at the habits of streaming services and go, wait, we do have a world where most people are willing to pay for that. What if we launch some type of business model and or marketing initiative or a merger of that would be reflective of our business? And suddenly you could be in a place where you could be in a highly regulated B2B procurement driven business, and yet you've got Netflix models coming out the wazoo. So those things I get excited. And even, we're talking right now about the collapse of NFTs, no value, people laughing about them. You're seeing things like investigations from governments. You're seeing arrests being made, heavy fines being levied. And all of that is real and true. And I don't really ever owned a real NFT, to be honest, because my perception of it was more like, hold on. If we have a physical world where goods are both scarce and abundant, why shouldn't digital assets replicate the real world? So why can't you have a digital asset that has scarcity? So there's only one, or there's one of X amount, or provenance to it, right? If I send you a file, Jim, it's not a copy. We could look at the digital code and go, it's exactly the same. There's been no degradation of quality. But if I said to you, Jim, this is number one, and I put a little piece of code on it that designs it as being number one or unique to you, suddenly it has provenance.
Right.
So this idea of, now hold on, what are we doing in business? What are the products and services we sell? Could any of them have any form of digital provenance or scarcity to it? Could this be? So that gets me. So these are the things when we talk about like, what are the big shifts? I think we can look at the big thing and go, NFTs, blockchain, not as cool to me as there might be a consumer behavior that is very unique, that is a pathway to a great new business model, whether it's B2B, B2C.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, all these technologies, my view on them is it's a technology looking for a solution, or for a problem to solve, excuse me. Blockchain was like that, NFTs are like that. And, if you remember, NFTs were going to change the world, right? Going to change real estate, was going to change government, and it's just not the case. And so
it still could,
I kind of started, but
it still could.
Case. Well, I get it, but give me the business case of what problem we're solving for ourselves or for a client, and then let's talk about the technology.
Yeah, I mean, so I could give you a whole bunch that I think would solve a lot of things. If you think about things like even, if you're in a situation where you're overseeing someone's will, you could see exactly where this technology would solve things really, really quickly. Instead of taking months and years and lawyers and problems, if this was in some way worked through these types of contracts or an NFT, it becomes very apparent and obvious, and you don't have that reconciliation or challenge of overseeing it. So, and that's one little thing. And I do believe that when it comes to arts, collectibles, and opportunities, these digital assets could hold and retain real value if done well, and if it isn't a Ponzi scheme or built off of hype or mischief. So I do also think that my thinking on this has changed dramatically as we start seeing this new era of artificial intelligence. I mean, too many people are, well, it's just like any other technology we got. And I'm like, I don't think you're spending even close to enough time with it if you think that this is just like when we had the printing press or Facebook got introduced. It's not that at all. And so to me, those are indicators also that we might be hitting another level that might dismiss our preconceived notions of even this tool, strategy, tactic of technology, and moving us to another level as well, which again, it's always hard to see when you're in it. That's the other reality.
Right. Interesting. Go down that path. So let's go over to another sort of going on the visionary
Let's
side.
go for it, Jim. Let's go.
I told you we're going to go for a couple things. We have maybe one other. So when you're in front of a CEO right now and they go, okay, Mitch, what are the three things I should be thinking about or worried about in my business? What are sort of the top three things you go, okay, I'd be really thoughtful about these couple of things because I think they are either major opportunities or major threats to your business. What sits on that list for you?
From the technology side, there's no doubt that artificial intelligence is grossly misunderstood. And I think that within the misunderstanding of it lies both a real threat and a real opportunity. But again, I don't think you and I would ever disagree that when there's any major shift, that it's always, agnostic, and there's a little bit of that. So there's no doubt that there needs to be a conversation about what are we doing? And the way that I frame that as a caveat is Google emergent thinking. I think having an emergent thinking mindset as a leader traipses into the other two thoughts that I would have. But I think it's a great way to create a bit of armor for leaders going forward. And emergent thinking basically means, look, we don't necessarily know what this tool, tactic, or technology is, but we're going to do things with it, and we don't even have necessarily a known or path outcome for it. But in the working of it, emergent ideas should and will come.
Got it.
So AI/emergent thinking is one of the big things I would talk about.
Got it. A little bit of an article of faith, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, look at the work that like Heidi Gardner has done in Harvard Business Review, and you'll start really seeing there's some really strong connective tissues in terms of not just into AI, but how emergent thinking can probably really help you just in an overall leadership capacity.
Okay.
The leadership question, I think, is an important one now. What is a leader? You used the C word earlier, coach. There's a lot of conversations around why does someone show up? And I look at gyms, there's a million places to work out and a million yoga mats to be had anywhere in the world. But what are the yoga mats that are filled? Where are the yoga mats where people would pay for where the yoga mat is on the floor? Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that for one reason: the person who's at the front of the room.
Sure.
And so when leaders start talking about all of these superfluous things they're doing for culture and all these things, the tough question that they have to ask, going back to what you're saying earlier, is, am I a reason why people would show up? And if you are not, that is really problematic in this day and age. This is a tough question. And this is a hard thing to do because I am the leader. I'm the CEO. I started this business. Maybe it's a family business. But if you're not the reason why people would show up, even when they have no reason to show up, that's a problem. Right. And when I say show up, I don't even mean physical. I just mean I'm here.
Right.
It's an important idea, right? So that would be two, is this idea of like, am I the type of person that people want to show up for?
Yep. I have a friend who says, it's a quaint saying, but he says, a leader without followers is like a guy taking a walk by himself, something along those lines. And it's true. What is the definition of leader? It's somebody who people want to follow, they want to be with, they want to be affiliated with, right? So I support that idea. It is interesting, just in the sort of global virtual team space, we're seeing a lot of work on shared leadership. So the idea that the baton gets passed around the team potentially based on the nature of the task.
Yeah, I'm very close with Professor Carl Moore here in Montreal, who's very close with Henry Mintzberg, and they work, do a fantastic work for the International and Business School. And Carl always talks, and I've been doing this without Carl's direction or thinking, of having a mentor that's younger than you. Not just someone who's older than you, but someone who's younger than you. Like, let them show you what they're up to. And I was doing this unintentionally my whole life. I'm always meeting young entrepreneurs and people who are interesting. I've got that energy for them and time for them. But it made me realize that we often look to people who are smarter, who have done more, versus how about the people who are extremely. So I think that falls into what you're saying too, is what was encapsulated into that leadership question with CEOs. And the third one, it's a boring one, but it's a real one, which is the economy. Okay. This is a really different time. And the word that I use to define it is lumpy. Like, it's a very lumpy economy. It almost is, if it was nonsensical before, it's got its own psychological differences now at a scale of which we've never seen. And it's an important thing to understand, because one is you're dealing with the factors within your organization, but the macro factors might actually be impacting your potential for success. And there is no control over those. So it's not to just dismiss it and say, I don't understand what's going on. It's not to say we're talking about climate or the war in the Ukraine, or we're talking about interest rates, or we're talking about real estate and what's happening with people's mortgages. I think we're talking about everything and everything all at once in an economy where people are also not panicked. Like typically, if you had this type of economic activity, people would be very hunkered down and not wanting to shift and change. So that's another indication, not that they're doing that, but that it's not a factor.
Right.
These are huge things that I think CEOs intuitively know, like, of course, you have to pay attention to the economy, but I mean like real digging in and thinking about what happens in a world where it's not one or two things that might knock things off the rail, but there could be things coming from all directions at any point in time. These are really big, challenging questions. And again, I think that kind of sachets into the world of digital currencies and cryptocurrencies and centralized and decentralized platforms. It's easy to say like none of this works. And I'd be the first person to say that there's an irony that the minute someone loses their Bitcoin, they suddenly quickly jump into a centralized platform like the legal system to try and get it back, right? Like there's irony in that. But you can look at the irony and laugh and go, well, I'm not in crypto. Or you can look at it and say, hold on, like there's some really powerful forces at play in our economy where centralized and decentralized platforms are at play. And what does that mean for us? And the answer is, I don't necessarily know, but I spend a lot of time reading and thinking about what could the world look like if the economy was very different tomorrow.
Interesting. It's almost overwhelming. I mean, if you there's
that's the one that
there's
is
financial, there's economic, there's cultural, all potentially monstrous disruptors to our business.
Well, political too, right? Like even politics,
absolutely.
like politics wasn't really this thing. I mean, it always had impact, but it wasn't, it was more like, this is the way I live and think versus now where it's become so nationalistic, so socialistic. So it's really a powerful driver of that because people are physically, and they have been for decades, moving to be next to people who are like them. And that's a big shift in how economies flow.
Yep. Wow, it's almost militant at some levels. At least in the US it is. Hey, let's end on this topic, Mitch. I said you're a professional traveler. And so why could you give us your top 3 professional traveler tips for those that hit the road and fly and stay in hotels and so forth? What would be your top 3? You can go 4 or 5 if you got some other ones, but what are your top?
One is at this point, stay home. I mean, I don't know if you've been out there. It's like, it's not fun.
No, and in fact, airline travel has become unreliable, which it was never the case.
Yeah, I mean, this is the big one is time.
Yeah,
really focus on time. You know, here where I live, we're going through a lot of challenges with even getting to the airport. You'll sometimes see lineups of 2 kilometers just to get into the airport.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes there's no parking like anywhere, so you're kind of there after being late. I mean, it's become really, really stressful. So I don't want to say it's stressful. I want to say think about time. To me, there is no such thing as a delay anymore. So if your flight is estimated to be somewhere and it's 4 hours later, there is no delay. That's when it was supposed to land. And you kind of just have to be able to roll with it. So
it's a very zen view of the universe.
You have to have it now. So very, very decompressed on the time thing. If you have a meeting, you got to plan to be there the day before. There's no, you got connections, plan to sleep in every city where that connection is going to happen. So one is just time. 2 is you need to be as self-contained as possible. You know, in my backpack, it's like a go bag. I don't have to struggle to find cables and dongles and passports and my medication and an extra pair of underwear. I literally carry it every day in the same bag I bring here, even though I'm not going on the road. So being self-contained is, again, all the chargers, batteries, charged up extra batteries. I'm ready to go on a moment's notice, which means that when I'm in it and things are going sideways, I'm in it for the long haul and I'm self-contained. So that's being, my Kindle's fully charged. I got multiple noise canceling things. I know people might think masks are really contentious. Personally, I love wearing a mask when I travel because I just don't have to talk to anybody. And I'm self-contained, and maybe they'll avoid me because they'll think I have something. But I do like that ability to be have it all together. So I think that's important. 3 is there are ways to make it easier on you as possible. Unfortunately, when you travel, ease has a price. And this becomes, first world problems maybe points of privilege, but things like Global Entry Nexus. I also have Clear. I also have credit cards that give me access to as many lounges as possible. I also have, I try and be very loyal on my status just by the nature of it, so that, and yeah, there are often times where I will not take that direct flight and or go the next day, just because if I travel on another airline where I don't have status, if things go sideways, they go sideways. It means buying, unfortunately, the more expensive tickets, because you want them to be refundable. You want them to have some security attached to them. I'm not sure where I fall on buying insurance on top of those tickets. I haven't gone that far in my life, but I do think that those tools make it easier to flow through the world. And, with that is just like the mobile apps and devices and all that, like just making sure you have every airline, every club, every airport. You have to be really on it. I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, I like to travel light. To me, there's just no conversation. It's always carry on. And I have multiple carry-ons so that they fit multiple different planes. If I have a connection plane, it's one of those smaller, like literally. And yeah, I'm sacrificing things like if I get stuck, I might have to run into a Uniqlo or Old Navy to buy underwear. Like that might happen. But I'm very much looking at the planes that I'm on with this, because you can even go with a carry-on and they got to gate check that. You got a tight connection or something changes. I'm always making sure, again, that's the whole thing. Everything's on me. Right. So those are some of them, but I've got a million little toys and trinkets we could discuss too.
Yeah, no, I know you've done articles on all your toys and trinkets, and I bought, I think, about half of them actually already. So,
well, I'll tell you one, the secret to that tight packing is I use these Eagle Creek. People know them as like the bags that you put your, you can do one for underwear, one for socks, but there's a version that has compression, which is there's an extra zipper you can push and zip. Those I think are like life-saving when it comes to the smaller carry-ons. I can literally take one of these that looks like it's a half day and pack for 2 or 3 days with it, just because of the way and by the way, they're so useful when you get to the room, just take them out, where your stuff is, where cleans and dirties are. It's great. So people buy those bags, those organizer bags. They don't realize that some of them come with compression. I use the Eagle Creek brand, but I do believe that places like the Container Store and Amazon have their own brands like that. But you'll see it's like it says compression. It's got a little zipper around it.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, this was phenomenal. We went all over the place on this conversation, which I knew we would.
Yeah.
I think Sharon asked me, "Are we going to have an agenda?" I'm like, "No, we're just going to talk." So, and it was as good as I thought it would be. Just finish this on. If people want more of you, where do they go to get more of you?
Go to thinkersone.com. You'll see the platform, or go to 6pixels.com or mitchjoel.com, and you'll find all the content.
Love it, Mitch. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
So good to see you, Jim. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.